Hey guys, tonight we are not riding across the steppes or exploring busy ancient markets. No, tonight you are stepping into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, to the sprawling Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Perhaps sometime in the 16th or 17th century, during the height of the Sultan's power, imagine immense opulent courtyards, richly decorated rooms adorned with tiles and calligraphy, shaded corridors, and the scent of exotic flowers or spices on the air. This was a world unto itself, a center of immense power, elaborate ritual, and a complex hierarchy. But in certain parts of this vast palace, particularly in the private quarters and around the person of the Sultan himself, the atmosphere was defined by something quite surprising, and to modern ears, perhaps a little unsettling, a profound quiet, an almost eerie silence. Communication here wasn't always done with spoken words, or at least not loud ones. You probably won't survive this history lesson without feeling the weight of that stillness, and maybe a little confused about having to whisper everything, or just point instead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking through a corridor deep within the inner parts of Topkapi Palace. Outside, beyond the palace walls, the city of Istanbul is a symphony of sounds. The calls to prayer, the chatter of markets, the noise of workshops, the movement of people and animals. Even in the outer courtyards of the palace, there are sounds of activity. Guards marching, servants working, officials conversing in normal tones. But as you move deeper, towards the private apartments of the Sultan, the sounds begin to fade. Voices are hushed. Footsteps seem softer. The general hum of life is muffled. And in the immediate vicinity of the Sultan's presence, the atmosphere is one of striking quiet, or often near silence. This wasn't an accidental tranquility. It was a deliberate, enforced quietness, a characteristic feature of the Sultan's immediate environment within the palace. The Sultan was the absolute ruler, the Padishah, holding immense political, military, and religious authority. His status was elevated, semi-sacred, and his person was often kept somewhat secluded from the general population, even within the palace walls. This physical and social distance was reinforced by the atmosphere around him. Imagine being in a room where the most powerful man in the empire is present. The air feels still, perhaps heavy with unspoken words. People move with careful, quiet steps. Whispers are rare, loud speech almost unheard of. The sounds you might hear are deliberate and controlled. The soft rustle of rich fabrics, the gentle clinking of fine pottery, the quiet sounds of attendants performing duties. But the constant, unpredictable noise of typical human interaction is significantly absent. In parts of the Ottoman imperial palace, particularly within the Sultan's private quarters and during interactions in his immediate presence, there was often a strictly maintained atmosphere of quiet or near silence, a deliberate policy that distinguished these areas from the more bustling parts of the palace and the outside world. This is our mainstream historical fact, setting the scene of the silent court. This quietness was enforced for multiple potential reasons. Creating an aura around the Sultan, it could serve as a form of security, making it harder for unauthorized individuals to overhear conversations or plot undetected near the center of power. It could emphasize secrecy, ensuring that sensitive discussions and decisions were not easily audible. It was also undoubtedly a mark of extreme respect and reverence for the Sultan's elevated status. His presence commanded stillness and quiet, reinforcing his absolute authority and setting him apart from ordinary mortals. It created an atmosphere of awe and mystery around the ruler. Sensory details the feel of stepping into a quiet, almost still space. The lack of expected sounds. The visual of ornate rooms where silence reigns. The feeling of the weight of that stillness. This wasn't total silence everywhere, all the time. Certain sounds might have been permitted or even part of rituals. but the general atmosphere around the Sultan was controlled to an extreme degree. A quirky tidbit about the silence involves specific sounds that were either unusually permitted or unusually forbidden. Some historical accounts mention specific types of quiet music, or certain gentle sounds like water fountains being allowed in the Sultan's private gardens or courtyards, contrasting with the enforced human quiet. Conversely, specific accidental noises, perhaps a dropped object, a loud cough, or a stumble, made in the Sultan's immediate presence could be considered a significant breach of protocol, reflecting how tightly sound was controlled. Imagine someone trying desperately to stifle a sneeze near the Sultan. There's joke number one. Bless you. Oh dear, was that too loud? Am I in trouble? Historians debate the primary motivations behind the strict control of sound and the enforced quietness in the Ottoman imperial palace around the Sultan. Was the overwhelming reason practical, primarily for security and secrecy in a court known for political intrigue? Or was it more symbolic and ritualistic, a means of cultivating an aura of awe, mystery, and elevated, almost divine status around the ruler, making him seem more distant and powerful? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, understanding the balance between practical necessity and symbolic performance in creating the silent court. The profound quietness of the Ottoman court, especially around the Sultan, was a deliberate feature, a tool of power and control. It was a striking contrast to the noisy, vibrant world outside. Joke number two. You step into the silent corridor. Well, this is certainly not like the market. And this absence of loud, spoken words in the immediate vicinity of the Sultan directly led to the development and extensive use of other, often silent, forms of communication, gestures, and sign language, which became essential for navigating this unique environment. Joke number three. You try to ask a question, you gesture vaguely, someone gestures back, equally vaguely. Communication, it's happening. You've stepped into the enforced quiet of Topkapi Palace, an atmosphere of stillness and muffled sounds surrounding the Sultan's private quarters. But this quiet wasn't just about having a peaceful workspace or a serene living environment. It was intrinsically linked to the Sultan's position itself. The ruler of the Ottoman Empire held an elevated status that demanded a certain kind of interaction, often one that was indirect or nonverbal, reinforcing his distance from ordinary mortals. The Ottoman Sultan was not just a king or an emperor in the European sense. He was the Padishah, the absolute ruler, often seen as God's shadow on earth, a figure possessing immense political, military, and religious authority. This position elevated him far above his subjects, even the highest-ranking officials and members of the imperial family within the palace. This elevated status translated into elaborate court protocols designed to maintain a physical and social distance around his person. Access to the Sultan was highly restricted. Only certain individuals held the privilege of entering his private apartments or being granted an audience. When approaching him, complex rituals of bowing and obeisance were required. Direct informal conversation was limited, even for those who had access. This protocol created an atmosphere of reverence, sometimes mixed with fear, around the Sultan, making every interaction significant and carefully managed. This physical and social distance, combined with the strictly enforced quietness in his immediate vicinity, created the necessity for alternative communication methods. Direct, loud, or casual spoken conversation was often deemed inappropriate, disrespectful, or too risky in this controlled environment. Sensitive matters needed to be discussed without the possibility of being easily overheard by servants or others who might be nearby but out of sight. The Sultan's will needed to be conveyed efficiently, but often without lengthy verbal exchanges. Communicating indirectly or non-verbally became a sign of respect for his elevated status, a way of not bothering him with direct speech unless absolutely necessary, or ensuring that sensitive information flowed only between those intended to receive it, bypassing potential eavesdroppers. It was a system designed for discretion and control. The Sultan's daily routine within the palace involved time spent in various private apartments, audience chambers, and perhaps parts of the harem. While formal public audiences might involve more traditional verbal communication, often through translators or intermediaries, interactions within his inner private world and the immediate vicinity of his person often relied heavily on this alternative, nonverbal system. The strictness of the quiet and the reliance on gestures were most pronounced in these inner, but more secluded areas of the palace. Imagine the feeling of being granted an audience or being present in the Sultan's private chambers. The opulence of the surroundings, rich carpets, tiled walls, fine furnishings, would be striking. But the overriding sensation would be the palpable tension in the air, the weight of the Sultan's authority, and the enforced quiet. People would move with extreme care, their footsteps soft, their breathing perhaps shallow. Any communication would be done through hushed tones if speaking was allowed at all, or, increasingly, through a system of gestures. Sensory details, the visual of the Sultan seated on a throne or divan, the feeling of awe and nervousness in his presence, the palpable tension in the air, the almost absence of sound, save for soft rustles or very quiet movements. The Ottoman Sultan held an extremely elevated position as an absolute ruler, often seen as God's representative on earth. This status translated into elaborate court protocols, highly restricted direct access to his person, and a requirement for indirect or nonverbal communication in his immediate presence, creating an atmosphere of distance, reverence, and controlled information flow. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the Sultan's status and its communication implications. A quirky tidbit about the Sultan's elevated status and the restrictions around him involves specific, sometimes strange, rules about how people were expected to behave or what they were allowed to do in his presence beyond just silence. Some accounts mention rules about avoiding pointing directly at him, or specific ways of holding your hands, or even types of clothing that were required or forbidden. Imagine a rule where you had to communicate through interpretive dance if you wanted to request something simple. Just to emphasize the Sultan's grandeur. There's joke number 1, Your Majesty, I humbly request, performs elaborate mime of needing more tea. Historians debate the extent to which the Sultan's apparent seclusion and reliance on indirect communication, particularly sign language, was primarily a matter of personal preference for individual sultans, versus being strictly dictated by established rigid court tradition and security protocols that evolved over time. Did some sultans maintain more personal verbal interaction with their officials and family than others? Or was the reliance on gestures a consistent feature across reigns, driven more by the institution of the sultanate and the palace system than by the individual ruler? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning how much the sultan's personality shaped this communication style versus it being a fixed part of court life. The sultan's elevated status was the core reason for the enforced quiet and the necessity of nonverbal communication. It created a unique environment where power was often conveyed through silence and understanding relied on subtle gestures, setting the stage to explore the system of signs they actually used. Joke number 2. You try to get the Sultan's attention with a cough. Nothing. You try a polite wave. Still nothing. Maybe interpretive dance. It was a world where silence spoke volumes, and gestures held the weight of imperial command. Joke number 3. You imagine a job interview for a court official, fluent in Turkish good, proficient in elaborate symbolic gesturing essential. You've glimpsed the profound quiet surrounding the Ottoman Sultan, a stillness intrinsically linked to his elevated status, creating an aura of awe and distance. But this quiet wasn't just about cultivating a ceremonial atmosphere or simple reverence. It was also a very practical, very deliberate strategy in a palace where immense power was wielded, and the stakes were incredibly high. In the Ottoman court, palace secrecy often literally demanded silence. The Ottoman court, particularly within the Topkapi Palace, was a place of immense power but also one of intense political intrigue. Factions competed for influence. Ambitious officials sought the Sultan's favor, and whispers of plots and counterplots were never far from the surface. Rivalries between viziers, pashas, eunuchs, and members of the imperial family were constant. In such an environment, information was power, and controlling its flow was paramount. The spoken word, especially near the Sultan's person, was a risk. Even seemingly casual conversations could be misinterpreted, misreported, or deliberately twisted by eavesdroppers or spies. A careless comment, a muttered complaint, or an overheard fragment of a sensitive discussion could have severe consequences for those involved, potentially leading to disgrace, exile, or worse. The vastness of the palace meant that potential spies could be lurking anywhere, behind curtains, in adjacent rooms, among the myriad servants. This inherent danger of overheard conversations led to a system where silence became a crucial security measure. If you spoke, you risked being heard by unintended ears. If you didn't speak, or spoke only in a controlled, non-audible way, you greatly reduced that risk. This is where the systematic use of silent communication, particularly sign language and gestures, became vital. The highly secretive and often politically volatile environment of the Ottoman imperial court fostered the extensive use of nonverbal communication, particularly a formalized system of sign language, as a crucial measure for security and to prevent sensitive political or personal information from being overheard, leaked, or distorted by eavesdroppers and rivals. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting secrecy as a core driver. Silent communication addressed multiple aspects of palace security. It prevented casual overhearing of sensitive discussions, allowing high-ranking officials to communicate directly with the Sultan or among themselves in his presence without fear of their words being intercepted. It allowed for private conversations even in seemingly public or semi-public spaces within the palace, where unseen eyes but not ears might still be present. It also ensured a greater degree of control over the flow of information. Commands and reports were conveyed only to those who understood the specific gestures, bypassing anyone not privy to the silent language. A crucial element in this system, as we will explore further, was the presence of mutes, deaf individuals who were specially trained for court service and became adept at this unique form of sign language. Their role was invaluable precisely because they heard nothing. They could not be bribed or coerced to reveal spoken conversations because they did not perceive them. This made them ideal conduits for the Sultan's most private communications. Imagine the atmosphere this created. A constant undercurrent of caution and guardedness around any verbal communication. People moving with a studied quietness, their expressions carefully neutral. The subtle flick of a hand, a specific gesture from a high official, a series of complex movements from the Sultan, these unspoken exchanges carrying immense weight, conveying commands, reports, or diplomatic instructions, all in profound silence. Sensory details the feeling of tension or paranoia in the air where important discussions are happening. The visual of careful, precise hand movements conveying complex ideas. The lack of audible chatter even in busy-looking areas. A quirky tidbit about this secrecy involves methods of deliberate misdirection or the careful management of visible communication. Sometimes, officials might engage in seemingly mundane or innocuous verbal exchanges to mask a more important, silent conversation happening through gestures simultaneously, or certain highly sensitive communications might involve multiple layers of silent interpretation to ensure absolute secrecy. Imagine two courtiers having a loud, pointless verbal argument while discreetly, under their sleeves, they are signing a crucial secret message to each other. There's joke number one, yes. I'm loudly complaining about the weather to distract everyone from the secret message I'm signing to the Grand Vizier. Multitasking. Historians debate the true effectiveness of the silent communication system in comprehensively safeguarding state secrets and preventing political intrigue within the Ottoman palace. While it certainly prevented casual overhearing, given that many high-ranking courtiers and the required interpreters still understood the signs, was it a genuinely impenetrable security measure, or was it primarily a psychological deterrent, making everyone feel that secrets were better kept silently, even if some information might still have leaked through other means. This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into how secure this silent system actually was. The demand for secrecy turned the Sultan's immediate vicinity into a highly secure, almost soundproofed zone of power and hidden information. Joke number 2. You try to discreetly listen to a silent conversation. Lots of hand movements. Must be discussing the new tax policy, or perhaps ordering more baklava. Hard to tell. This unique environment, where silence spoke volumes, made the Sultan's court a place unlike any other, where every gesture held the weight of imperial command. Joke number 3. You imagine someone trying to pass a rumor silently. Psst. Gestures wildly, attempts to mime a secret. Did you get that? It was about the Sultan's cat. The strict quietness around the Ottoman Sultan, born from his elevated status and the intense need for palace secrecy and security, set the stage for a unique form of communication. But who were the individuals who facilitated this silent exchange, becoming essential figures in the imperial court, bridging the gap between a silent ruler and the world around him? These were the mutes, deaf individuals who played a significant, often surprising, and deeply trusted role in the life of the Ottoman Sultan and the functioning of Topkapi Palace. The presence of deaf servants in the Ottoman court became particularly prominent from the 16th to the 18th centuries. They were often referred to by European visitors as mutes, a term that referred to their inability to hear or speak in the conventional sense, rather than an inability to communicate. These individuals were highly valued for specific roles within the palace hierarchy. The primary reason for choosing deaf individuals for such sensitive roles revolved directly around palace security and secrecy. In a court riddled with political intrigue, rivalries, and the constant fear of plots against the Sultan, spoken words were a dangerous vulnerability. Conversations could be overheard, misinterpreted, or deliberately leaked by spies or ambitious rivals. A deaf attendant, by definition, could not overhear conversations. They could not be bribed or coerced to reveal what they heard, because they heard nothing. This made them uniquely trustworthy in an environment where information control was paramount. They were seen as loyal and discreet. Their recruitment varied. Some deaf individuals might have entered palace service as children, possibly through the devshirme system, a levy of Christian boys from the Balkans for Ottoman service. Although deaf individuals had a specific status within this, or sometimes came from other backgrounds. Others might have been brought from noble families or simply acquired as young individuals if their deafness was seen as an advantage for court service. Once in the palace, they were meticulously trained. This training included not only the intricate palace sign language, which we'll explore in the next section, but also the complex rules of court protocol, etiquette, and the specific demands of personal service to the Sultan. The roles of the mutes in the palace were surprisingly diverse, reflecting their deep integration into the Sultan's personal retinue and the inner workings of the court. They served as personal attendants to the Sultan, close by his side in his private chambers. They acted as guards, standing sentinel in important locations, their watchful eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They could be messengers, carrying instructions between the Sultan and various officials without a single word being spoken. Some even performed as entertainers, bringing silent performances to the court. But above all, they were crucial communicators. Sensory details, the visual of their precise, fluid hand movements, the constant quiet atmosphere around them, the feeling of their watchful, attentive presence. Their ability to communicate directly with the Sultan in silence gave them a unique and powerful position. They could convey confidential reports or receive secret commands directly from the Sultan without a sound being uttered. Bypassing layers of verbal bureaucracy, wary viziers, or potential eavesdroppers. This direct silent channel of communication meant they held immense trust from the Sultan himself. For a ruler often secluded and constantly aware of potential threats, a communication method that inherently safeguarded against eavesdropping was invaluable. Deaf individuals, often referred to as mutes, played a significant, often highly trusted, and unique role in the Ottoman imperial court. particularly from the 16th to 18th centuries. They served as personal attendants, guards, and, crucially, as indispensable silent communicators who facilitated secure and secret exchanges around the Sultan's person due to their inability to overhear sensitive conversations. This is our mainstream historical fact, cementing their distinct role. A quirky tidbit about their unique position involves their occasional role in sensitive state affairs, sometimes quite grim ones. Due to their trustworthiness and inability to relay spoken words, mutes were sometimes employed as executioners for high-ranking officials who had fallen out of favor with the Sultan. The condemned official would be led to the mute, who would then silently carry out the execution, often by strangulation, without a single word being spoken, maintaining the chilling secrecy of the palace. Imagine being led to your fate by a perfectly silent, expressionless figure who communicates only with a final, somber gesture. There's joke number one. He's very good at his job. Never says a word. Especially useful for sensitive dismissals. Historians debate the social origins and precise integration of deaf individuals into the Ottoman imperial court. Were they always of slave origin? Perhaps acquired through the devshirme system or purchased, reflecting the common status of many palace servants? Or did some freeborn individuals with hearing impairments also enter such service, seeking the unique opportunities for status, trust, and even a degree of power that this court role offered to those with their specific abilities? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into their background and whether their service was entirely coerced or if it presented a unique path for the deaf within the Ottoman system. The mutes were central to the functioning of the silent court. Their unique abilities transformed what might be perceived as a disability into a vital asset, making them indispensable figures in the Sultan's intimate circle. Joke number two. You imagine a mute trying to ask for a raise. Gestures frantically for more gold. Did he get it? Can't tell. How? Their presence, watchful and quiet, underscores the pervasive atmosphere of guarded communication in the Ottoman imperial palace, setting the stage to explore the precise sign language they used. Joke number three. You try to tell a joke to a mute? You mime it, they just stare. Right, lost in translation, I suppose. The mutes, those deaf individuals serving in the Ottoman court, were indispensable for maintaining the enforced quiet and vital secrecy around the Sultan. Their unique ability to hear nothing made them perfectly suited for carrying secret messages and attending to the Sultan's personal needs. But their invaluable role depended entirely on a sophisticated, fascinating system of communication that allowed complex ideas to be exchanged without a single audible word, the palace sign language. This wasn't just a handful of simple gestures like pointing or nodding. It was a well-developed, comprehensive system of hand movements. Facial expressions, though often subtle due to courtly decorum, and body postures, capable of conveying a wide range of commands, questions, reports, and even more nuanced conversations in complete silence. The primary purpose of this palace sign language was, of course, to enable nuanced communication in the Sultan's immediate, silent environment. In a world where speaking aloud might be forbidden or risky, this visual language allowed for efficient and secure exchanges between the Sultan, his most trusted officials, and the mutes who served as their silent intermediaries. The vocabulary of the language was extensive. It included signs for common court terms, titles of officials like Grand Vizier, Aga of the Janissaries, important people, places within the palace or empire, specific actions sit, stand, leave, bring, prepare, emotions, and abstract concepts like conspiracy, loyalty, treason, favor, or displeasure. Imagine having a distinct hand sign for bring me my coffee versus execute the Grand Vizier. Joke number one. Knowing the sign for coffee was probably essential for daily court life. The sign for treason was presumably less frequently used, thankfully. The language also likely had a degree of structure, even if it wasn't a formal, grammatically complex language in the modern linguistic sense of say American Sign Language or British Sign Language, ideas were conveyed through a sequence of gestures, specific hand shapes, movements, and often a reliance on context and shared understanding between the conversants. It was a visual dance of information. Its non-auditory nature was its strength. It was designed to be seen, not heard. This made it inherently secure in a way that spoken language could never be. Conversations conducted in palace sign language could take place in a room full of people, with only those fluent in the signs understanding the exchange, while others would perceive only polite silence and careful hand movements. Sensory details the visual of precise, fluid hand movements, sometimes rapid, sometimes slow and deliberate, the complete absence of audible speech, the subtle shifts in facial expression that added nuance to the signs, the feeling of intense visual concentration required to understand the communication. The development of this palace sign language is fascinating. It likely evolved organically within the Topkapi Palace over generations, stemming from the practical need for silent communication around the Sultan. It might have borrowed elements from existing regional sign languages or common gestures used outside the court, but it would have been specialized and refined for the unique lexicon and protocols of Ottoman court life. It was a living language, adapting and expanding as the court's needs changed. Crucially, this silent language was not just known by the mutes. The Sultan himself was highly proficient in it, as were his closest and most trusted officials, such as the Grand Vizier and high-ranking members of the Imperial Council. They needed to communicate directly with the Sultan and with the mutes, who served as his personal attendants and messengers. Becoming fluent in the palace sign language was a vital skill for anyone wishing to rise to the highest echelons of power in the Ottoman Empire. A quirky tidbit about the palace sign language involves specific, unusual signs mentioned in historical accounts, or a particularly literal sign for a complex concept. One account might describe a sign for execution that involved a swift gesture across the throat, or a sign for favor that involved a gentle hand motion towards the chest. Imagine a whole secret lexicon where abstract ideas were conveyed through physical actions. There's joke number 2. The sign for "I humbly disagree." Your Majesty was probably subtly different from the sign for "Please remove my head." Important distinctions. The Ottoman Imperial Court developed and extensively utilized a sophisticated system of palace sign language, a non-auditory method of communication known by deaf servants mutes and mastered by the Sultan and his key officials, designed to facilitate secure, discreet, and nuanced exchanges around the Sultan's person and within sensitive areas of the palace for purposes of secrecy and protocol. This is our mainstream historical fact, establishing the language's existence and purpose. Historians debate the precise origin and linguistic complexity of the Ottoman palace sign language. Did it develop entirely sui generis from scratch within Topkapi Palace due to the unique court environment? Or did it incorporate elements from existing regional sign languages or general nonverbal communication prevalent in the Ottoman Empire and surrounding areas? How complex and standardized was its grammar and vocabulary compared to modern, fully developed sign languages? Was it a formal, consistent linguistic system, or more of a sophisticated pidgin or repertoire of specialized gestures? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into the scholarly understanding of this silent tongue. The palace sign language was a remarkable, elegant solution to the court's unique communication needs. It allowed for the flow of complex information and commands in an environment where silence was paramount, transforming visual gestures into instruments of power and discretion. Joke number 3. You try to hold a whispered conversation across a room. Nothing. You resort to wild gesturing. The official court language, very effective. The palace sign language was a remarkable, elegant solution to the Ottoman court's unique communication needs, allowing complex ideas to be exchanged in profound silence. But such a sophisticated visual language wasn't innate. It had to be learned, a crucial skill for anyone serving near the Sultan or aspiring to high office. This brings us to the fascinating process of learning the silent tongue. Learning this language was essential for various groups within the palace. For the mutes themselves, the deaf individuals who served as personal attendants and communicators, it was their primary means of interacting with the hearing world of the court. They would have learned it from a very young age, often through immersion within the palace environment, observing and imitating older mutes and hearing palace staff who were already proficient. Their learning would be largely visual and experiential, absorbing the signs and the subtle nuances of communication through constant exposure and practice. For hearing officials who aspired to communicate directly with the Sultan or needed to coordinate with the mutes, learning this palace sign language was a vital skill. It wasn't just a polite gesture. Proficiency was a mark of sophistication, dedication to court service, and a pathway to influence and power. The Grand Vizier, the head of the imperial administration, and other high-ranking officials would certainly have mastered this language, as they frequently needed to convey reports and receive commands from the Sultan without a sound. The training for hearing officials would have been more deliberate and formal than simple immersion. Imagine a designated teacher, perhaps an experienced mute who was particularly skilled at instruction, or a hearing official who had already mastered the language, conducting lessons in a quiet corner of the palace. The lessons would focus on memorizing the extensive vocabulary of signs, understanding the syntax, the order of gestures, and practicing the fluid movements that conveyed meaning. Sensory details the visual of precise, fluid hand movements being demonstrated and then mimicked, the quiet concentration of the learner, the mental effort of translating spoken concepts into visual signs and vice versa, the feeling of initial awkwardness as your hands try to form unfamiliar gestures. The challenge for hearing individuals learning this visual language was significant. They were accustomed to forming thoughts in spoken words, relying on auditory cues for meaning, learning to think in gestures, to compose a reply or a question entirely through hand movements and subtle facial expressions, was a profound cognitive shift. They had to learn to interpret the rapid, nuanced movements of experienced signers and communicate their own complex thoughts without a sound. Motivation was high. For hearing officials, mastering the palace sign language was not just about fulfilling a duty. It was about gaining direct access to the Sultan's presence and favor. Bypassing layers of verbal bureaucracy and potential intermediaries, it was a skill that could accelerate their career and enhance their influence, demonstrating their loyalty and competence in the unique silent environment of the inner court. Methods of practice would involve constant repetition. Officials might practice signs with mutes, with their own staff, or even secretly with other ambitious courtiers. They would observe fluent signers in action, internalizing the fluidity and precision. The subtle facial expressions that accompanied certain signs to convey emotion or emphasis would also need to be learned, though often kept subdued due to courtly decorum. Sensory details the visual of hands moving rapidly yet precisely, the quietness of the lesson environment, the sound of frustrated sighs when a sign is forgotten or misremembered, though quickly stifled. A quirky tidbit about learning the silent tongue involves specific mnemonic devices or unusual teaching exercises. Given the vast vocabulary, some instructors might have used visual aids like simple drawings or diagrams if allowed, or perhaps developed unique physical exercises to train the hands to perform complex sign sequences smoothly and rapidly. There are also anecdotes, though, mostly from later European accounts, and possibly exaggerated about officials being tested on their proficiency by unexpected silent commands from the Sultan, leading to a quick scramble to interpret and respond correctly. Imagine forgetting the sign for imperial decree during an exam with the Sultan. There's joke number one, and then the Sultan signed, "You're fired." And I just sat there, trying to remember if fired was 2 fingers or 3. The Ottoman Palace Sign Language was a specialized and essential communication system, taught to and learned by both deaf palace servants mutes, often from a young age through immersive observation and direct instruction, and by high-ranking hearing Ottoman officials who required direct, discreet communication with the Sultan and other mutes for official and sensitive matters, with proficiency serving as a mark of importance and access. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing the learning process. Historians debate the formality and standardization of the curriculum for learning the palace sign language. Was it a highly structured, codified teaching process with recognized stages of proficiency, similar to a formal language school today? Or was it primarily an immersion-based apprenticeship model, especially for the mutes, where knowledge was absorbed through constant exposure and imitation? With less formal instruction, did all officials learn the full vocabulary, or only a subset of signs most relevant to their specific duties and interactions with the Sultan? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into how this silent tongue was acquired and how uniform the teaching was. Learning the silent tongue transformed communication in the Ottoman court. It enabled precise information exchange in an environment defined by quietude and secrecy. Joke number 2. You try to hold a conversation entirely in signs. So much gesturing. My arms are getting a workout just saying hello. For those who mastered it, it was a vital skill, a pathway to influence, and a testament to the court's unique approach to communication. Joke number 3. You imagine trying to complain about the food in sign language. Dish. Bad. Dramatic mime of disappointment. Hopefully, he gets it. You've explored the palace sign language itself, a sophisticated system of gestures that allowed complex ideas to be exchanged in profound silence. And you've learned how both the mutes and key officials were meticulously trained in this silent tongue. But even with the Sultan and his closest circle fluent in signs, not everyone in the vast court, or every visitor from outside, was proficient in this unique visual language. This created a vital need for specialized individuals who could bridge the gap between the silent world of the inner palace and the spoken world beyond the interpreters of silence. These interpreters held an incredibly sensitive and powerful position. Their role was to accurately translate communication. If the Sultan or a mute was conveying a message in signs, the interpreter would translate those gestures into spoken language for a hearing official, a foreign ambassador, or another courtier not fluent in the silent tongue. Conversely, if a hearing person wished to address the Sultan or a mute, they would speak their message and the interpreter would then translate those spoken words into the appropriate signs. These interpreters were typically hearing officials who had achieved high proficiency in the palace sign language. They had undergone the rigorous training we discussed in the previous section, mastering the vast vocabulary and fluid grammar of the silent tongue. While mutes themselves were vital communicators within the silent world, their role was generally to convey signs, not necessarily to articulate complex thoughts in spoken language for others. Thus, hearing interpreters were crucial for two-way communication with the outside. The immense trust placed in these interpreters cannot be overstated. They were, quite literally, controlling the flow of information between the absolute ruler of the Ottoman Empire and the rest of the world. A misinterpretation, whether accidental or deliberate, could have enormous consequences. A misunderstanding in a diplomatic negotiation, an official receiving the wrong command, or a personal request being distorted. Their integrity and accuracy were paramount, and they would have been chosen from among the most loyal and reliable members of the court. Sensory details the visual of silent, precise gestures being made by one party, the soft, respectful voice of the interpreter translating those gestures into spoken words, the palpable tension in the air as important messages are conveyed through this two-step process, the feeling of immense responsibility resting on the interpreter's shoulders. Imagine the scene of foreign ambassador, perhaps accustomed to loud, boisterous European courts, granted an audience with the Sultan. The room is silent. The Sultan makes a series of elegant, precise gestures. The interpreter, standing nearby, then softly and respectfully translates the Sultan's silent command or question into the ambassador's language. The ambassador speaks their reply, and the interpreter immediately translates it back into signs for the Sultan. It was a fascinating, often theatrical, dance of communication. The challenges for these interpreters were significant. They needed not only perfect fluency in the palace sign language and multiple spoken languages, but also a deep understanding of court protocol, political nuances, and the specific context of any discussion. They had to be quick, accurate, and discreet, maintaining a neutral demeanor while conveying messages that could determine the fate of nations or individuals. A quirky tidbit about these interpreters involves specific historical accounts, often from European visitors, who were fascinated by this unique aspect of the court detailing their roles or unusual circumstances. Some accounts describe particular interpreters who gained significant influence due to their proximity to the Sultan and their control over communication, acting almost as unofficial advisors. There are also anecdotes, perhaps apocryphal, about dangerous misinterpretations, accidental or deliberate mistranslations of a sign that led to confusion or even political incident, highlighting the immense stakes involved. Imagine an interpreter accidentally signing "send 50,000 extra baklava" instead of "send 50,000 extra janissaries." There's joke number one. Interpreter, the Sultan commands. Morti a sotto voce to self. I really hope that was tea and not treason. Given the pervasive use of palace sign language to maintain secrecy and respect around the ruler, dedicated interpreters, often high-ranking hearing officials, highly proficient in both the silent tongue and multiple spoken languages, played a crucial and incredibly trusted role in the Ottoman court, serving as the essential bridge for communication between the Sultan's silent world and those not fluent in the unique sign system. This is our mainstream historical fact, emphasizing their vital, trusted position. Historians debate the precise social standing and potential political influence of interpreters for the Ottoman palace sign language. Were they considered indispensable but ultimately subservient facilitators? Or did their unique role, granting them unparalleled access and control over information flow directly to the Sultan, effectively grant them significant informal power and influence within the court hierarchy? Was their loyalty to the Sultan paramount? Or could they, in rare instances, manipulate messages for their own gain or that of their faction? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, probing the true power dynamics of their position. The interpreters of silence held a uniquely sensitive and powerful position, mastering a visual language to navigate the complexities of court life and bridge worlds. Joke number two. You nod to an interpreter. He's very good at his job. Never says a word that isn't already a translation. Their presence underscores the elegance and necessity of the palace's silent communication system. Joke number three. You imagine an interpreter trying to explain a modern idiom to the Sultan in sign language. Yes, Your Majesty. Spill the tea is a new concept for reveal a secret. It's a very complicated gesture. You've learned about the unique role of interpreters, bridging the gap between the silent world of the Sultan and the spoken world of the court. Now, let's delve into the practical application of this palace sign language from the perspective of someone who needed to communicate to the Sultan. Imagine you are a high official, a trusted palace servant, or perhaps even a member of the imperial family, tasked with conveying vital information or making a crucial request to the absolute ruler, all in profound silence. Conveying information, making requests, or reporting sensitive matters to the Sultan was a high-stakes endeavor in the Ottoman court. A misstep, a misunderstanding, or a breach of protocol could have severe consequences. And when communicating in silence, the pressure for clarity and precision was immense, even more so than with spoken words. You would typically find yourself in the Sultan's private quarters, a lavishly decorated but often eerily quiet chamber. The atmosphere would be charged with the weight of the Sultan's presence and authority, reinforced by the enforced stillness. You would approach the Sultan with the required bows and gestures of respect, your movements careful and deliberate, your expression controlled. Sensory details the visual of the opulent but silent chamber, the palpable tension in the air, the quiet rustle of your robes as you move, the weight of the moment. Before even stepping into the Sultan's presence for such a crucial exchange, you would have meticulously prepared your message. This involved not just formulating what you wanted to say in your mind, but translating it into the precise sequence of signs required by the palace sign language. You might have practiced the gestures beforehand, ensuring your hands moved fluidly and accurately, that your facial expressions, though often subtle due to court etiquette, conveyed the correct nuance, urgency, humility, respect. It was like rehearsing a silent, high-stakes play where every gesture mattered. The act of communicating to the Sultan using signs required complete focus. Your eyes would be fixed on the Sultan's face, trying to read his subtle reactions, his understanding, his mood. Even as your hands performed their intricate dance, you would make your signs clearly, precisely, ensuring each gesture was distinct and easily understood. The silence of the communication itself would be absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of movement or perhaps the distant, muffled sounds of the palace beyond the inner chambers. The types of information conveyed to the Sultan through signs were as varied as the matters of state and personal interest. You might be reporting military victories from distant campaigns, conveying news of battles won or lost, perhaps with signs representing armies, weapons, or conquered cities. Or you might be providing administrative updates on the functioning of the empire, signs for tax collection, justice, or public works projects, requests for favors, appointments to high office, or resources for a specific project would be presented through carefully chosen gestures. Sensory details the visual of your hands moving through the air, forming the distinct shapes of signs. The feeling of intense concentration as you strive for clarity. The silence, making the visual gestures even more prominent. More sensitive communications, like political advice or warnings about conspiracies or dangers, would be conveyed with even greater discretion and care. These might involve more subtle signs, perhaps communicated through a trusted mute attendant who understood the full context, ensuring that even if someone unfamiliar with the language happened to glimpse the interaction, they would understand nothing of its true meaning. This inherent security was a key advantage of the silent language. The Sultan's reaction, or lack thereof, would be crucial feedback. A subtle nod, a slight shift in posture, a particular gesture in return, or even a nuanced expression on his face would tell you if your message was understood, if he approved, or if he desired more information. Reading these subtle cues was as important as delivering your message accurately. In the highly controlled and often silent environment of the Ottoman imperial court, high-ranking officials and trusted palace servants routinely communicated sensitive reports, crucial requests, and vital advice to the Sultan through the formalized palace sign language, maintaining strict discretion and protocol while ensuring clear nonverbal transmission of information to the absolute ruler. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing how information flowed to the Sultan. A quirky tidbit about conveying information involves complex or abstract concepts that might have been particularly challenging to represent in a purely visual language. How do you sign economic inflation, or diplomatic nuance, or the subtle disloyalty of a provincial governor? It likely required a combination of established signs, more descriptive gestures, and reliance on context and the interpreter's if present skill. Imagine trying to explain a complex budget deficit with hand movements. There's joke number one. Your Majesty, the treasury is gestures emptying purse, crying. Is that clear? Historians debate the specific expressive capacity of the Ottoman palace sign language for conveying truly complex or nuanced reports, particularly for intricate administrative or diplomatic matters. Was it capable of the same level of detail as spoken language, allowing for intricate arguments and subtle distinctions? Or was it primarily used for conveying broad ideas and commands, with finer details filled in through written notes or during subsequent verbal meetings with trusted officials in less restricted environments? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning how intricate and detailed communication through this silent system could truly be. Communicating to the Sultan in silence was a masterclass in nonverbal precision, a delicate dance of hands and expressions. Joke number two, you nod gravely at the Sultan. I believe I just signed world peace and also more olives for dinner. Hope he got the right one. It was a demonstration of respect, discretion, and the immense power held in unspoken words. Joke number three, you finish your silent report. Well, that was certainly quieter than my last presentation, and probably just as effective. You've learned about how high-ranking officials and trusted palace servants meticulously prepared and conveyed sensitive reports. requests, and advice to the Sultan, navigating the complexities of silent communication. But the flow of information was, of course, two-way. Just as vital was the Sultan's ability to communicate outwards, to issue commands, express his will, or convey his pleasure or displeasure, often without uttering a single audible word. This brings us to the ultimate display of silent power, how the Sultan commanded with hand. Imagine yourself in the Sultan's presence, perhaps during a private audience or in a small gathering of his most intimate advisors. The atmosphere, as we've established, is one of profound quiet. Your eyes are fixed on the Sultan, observing his every subtle movement, his every nuanced expression. He may be seated on his throne or a plush divan, his presence radiating immense authority. And then he moves his hands. These are not random gestures, these are precise, deliberate movements, carefully chosen from the palace's codified sign language. Each gesture, each sequence of hand movements, carries absolute weight and meaning. There is no ambiguity. When the Sultan signs, his will is conveyed directly, silently, and instantly. He might issue simple, direct orders, a gesture for come, go, bring, prepare, sit, or stand. These are fundamental commands for his personal attendants, often the mutes, who would understand and execute them immediately. Sensory details the visual of the Sultan's hands moving with deliberate precision, the intense focus of everyone present on his gestures, the palpable silence that amplifies the importance of every movement. More complex commands might follow. He could signal approval or disapproval with a subtle hand motion, or a combination of gestures indicating yes or no, proceed or stop. He might ask a question with a specific interrogative sign. His displeasure could be conveyed with a sharp, decisive gesture, his favor with a softer, more inviting one. The execution of a high-ranking official, a matter of life and death, could be communicated with a single, chilling, silent gesture, often given to a mute executioner. Imagine the weight of a hand movement that seals someone's fate. The Sultan would often communicate directly with a mute attendant or a high-ranking official known to be proficient in the palace sign language. If the recipient was a mute, they would then convey the command to others if needed, either through signs or, if speaking to a hearing official, verbally through an interpreter, as discussed. If the recipient was a hearing official fluent in signs, they would receive the command directly, understand it in silence, and then execute it or pass it on verbally to their subordinates. The training the Sultan himself received in this language was crucial. While mutes learned it from childhood and officials mastered it to serve, the Sultan needed to be able to use it as an effective tool of governance. It was a skill passed down through the imperial line, ensuring continuity in this unique communication system. Ottoman sultans, particularly from the 16th to 18th centuries, routinely issued commands, expressed their will, and engaged in direct communication with their trusted palace servants and high-ranking officials through a formalized system of palace sign language. Leveraging precise gestures to maintain strict secrecy, reinforce their elevated status, and ensure the swift and discreet execution of their orders. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the Sultan's active use of the language. A quirky tidbit about the Sultan's silent commands involves specific, unusually powerful or chilling gestures that held immense weight. Historical accounts, often from later European observers fascinated by the system, describe particular signs for very serious matters, such as a subtle flick of the hand or a specific motion of the thumb that could signify a death sentence, or a gesture for disfavor that would immediately send a shiver down the spine of the recipient. Imagine a single, almost imperceptible gesture from the Sultan, leading to a man's fall from grace or worse. There's joke number one. He just silently ordered more baklava, but his hand gesture for extra syrup was terrifyingly precise. Historians debate the specific historical development and level of formalization of the Sultan's personal use of palace sign language. Was it a system entirely created for and by the Ottoman court? Or did it draw from wider existing sign language traditions outside the palace? Did different sultans vary significantly in their reliance on sign communication, with some preferring more verbal interaction despite the protocol, while others strictly adhered to silent communication as a matter of personal preference or principle? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into the nuances of the sultan's own relationship with the silent tongue. The sultan's ability to command with hand was a remarkable display of absolute power in a world where silence itself was a tool. His gestures carried the weight of imperial authority, ensuring discretion and control in the heart of the empire. Joke number 2. You watch the sultan make a complex series of gestures. Is he ordering a new military campaign, or does he just want more grapes? His very hands, without a sound, shaped the destiny of an empire. Joke number 3. You imagine explaining it to a modern leader. So no speeches, no press conferences, just a really good set of hand signals. Very efficient. You've learned about how officials conveyed information to the sultan through silent signs, and how the sultan himself commanded with his hand, issuing orders without a sound. But all this communication, to and from the ruler, happened within a very specific environment. The profound quietness around the Ottoman Sultan wasn't just a byproduct of using sign language or merely a tool for security and secrecy. It was also a deliberate policy, meticulously cultivated to create a specific atmosphere, an aura of stillness and awe around the absolute ruler. Imagine being in the Sultan's presence, perhaps in the audience hall, or in a private chamber. The air seems to hang heavier, still and expectant. Sounds that would be ordinary elsewhere, a rustle of fabric, a clearing of the throat, a whispered comment, seem amplified, almost forbidden. Everyone present moves with extreme care, their footsteps soft, their breathing perhaps shallow, their expressions carefully composed. There's a palpable sense of reverence and caution, a quiet intensity. This atmosphere was deliberately designed to elevate the Sultan's status far beyond that of an ordinary mortal ruler. By maintaining profound quiet, the Sultan was set apart from the noisy, bustling world of the palace, the city, and the empire. It made him seem more distant, more mysterious, almost divine. God's shadow on earth, a figure whose presence commanded not just obedience, but a deep, almost religious awe. The lack of ordinary sounds around him created a sense of unapproachability, enhancing his mystique and reinforcing his absolute authority. Sensory details the palpable stillness, almost thick enough to touch, the visual intensity of focusing on subtle movements in the silence, the feeling of pressure to remain utterly quiet, the magnified sound of your own careful breathing. This stillness also served to intensify the impact of his commands. In an environment where there was rarely any background noise or distracting chatter, every subtle gesture he made, every soft sound he might utter if he chose to speak directly to a mute or interpreter, took on immense weight. A flick of a hand, a slight inclination of his head, or a series of precise signs would carry the full force of imperial command, resonating more powerfully in the silence than a shouted order ever could. It commanded immediate attention and complete obedience. Comparing this strict control of sound to other contemporary courts is striking. Many European courts, even highly formal ones, were often noisy places, filled with the chatter of courtiers, the rustle of gowns, the clanking of swords, and the general hum of activity. The Ottoman court's deliberate quietude stood out as a unique characteristic, a testament to its unique conception of imperial power and protocol. Modern aside, it's like going from a busy, open-plan office to a soundproofed meditation chamber, where every subtle movement gains significance. You really notice how loud your own thoughts are. A quirky tidbit about maintaining this stillness involves specific rituals or architectural features designed to muffle sound. While not always explicitly detailed in sources, some accounts suggest specific floor coverings, arrangements of courtiers, or even the careful training of servants to move almost silently, all contributing to the pervasive quiet. There might have been specific postures or manners of standing required of attendants to ensure no accidental noise. Imagine learning to walk without making a single sound. There's joke number one. His Majesty requests absolute silence. Any creaking floorboards will be politely reprimanded and perhaps replaced with softer, less creaky floorboards. The enforced quietness and pervasive stillness in the Ottoman imperial palace around the Sultan were deliberately cultivated not only for practical security and secrecy reasons, but also, and significantly, to create an aura of profound awe, mystery, and sacred distance around the ruler, thereby elevating his perceived status and intensifying the impact of his every command or gesture among courtiers and visitors. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the atmospheric purpose of the silence. Historians debate the precise psychological and political impact of the Ottoman court's enforced stillness around the Sultan. How effective was this deliberate cultivation of an aura of stillness in truly enhancing the Sultan's perceived power, or even hinting at a divine connection among his subjects and foreign visitors? Was it universally understood and accepted as awe-inspiring? Or did some, particularly from different cultural contexts, view it as eccentric, isolating, or even intimidating in a negative way? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into how this profound quiet affected the minds and perceptions of those who experienced it. The aura of stillness around the Sultan was a powerful, non-verbal tool of governance and presence. It made every interaction significant, every command weighty, and every moment in his presence one of heightened awareness. Joke number two. You try to discreetly yawn. It echoes slightly. You immediately regret it. It was a unique form of imperial communication, where silence spoke volumes, and the absence of sound communicated absolute power. Joke number three. You imagine someone trying to tell a joke to the Sultan. It would fall incredibly flat in that silence. You've learned about how officials conveyed information to the Sultan, and how the Sultan himself commanded with his hand, all within that awe-inspiring aura of stillness that surrounded the ruler. But the palace sign language, born from the need for discretion and reverence, extended its use beyond just formal communication with the Sultan. In the highly competitive and often dangerous environment of the Ottoman court, where political intrigue and rivalries were rampant, this silent tongue became an invaluable tool for secret palace whispers and clandestine matters. The Ottoman court was a hotbed of ambition and conspiracy. Factions constantly vied for power. Officials rose and fell, and betrayal was a constant threat. In such an environment, the spoken word was a liability. Even hushed whispers could be overheard by eavesdroppers, loyal to a rival faction, or simply curious palace servants. Any sensitive information, any hint of a plot, any discussion of a strategy needed to be conveyed with absolute discretion. This is where the palace sign language truly shone as a tool for secrecy. Two individuals, both fluent in the language, could stand in a seemingly open courtyard, in a busy corridor, or even within sight of others in a public audience chamber, and engage in a completely private conversation. Their hands would move subtly, conveying complex messages, while their faces might maintain an air of polite boredom or casual observation. To anyone not privy to the silent language, they would simply appear to be standing quietly together, perhaps observing the surroundings. This provided crucial visual privacy that spoken language could not. You could see the people, but you couldn't understand what they were saying. It was security against eavesdropping, preventing spies or rivals from overhearing crucial information, allowing for clandestine planning or the exchange of highly sensitive intelligence. It turned even a seemingly exposed space into a secure channel for communication. Sensory details the visual of two figures standing close, their hands moving subtly, almost imperceptibly, below a cloak or near their bodies. The intense focus in their eyes, the palpable silence around them, contrasted with distant palace murmurs. The feeling of discretion and hidden meaning. Those who would use the language for such secret purposes were often high-ranking officials, involved in sensitive political maneuvers. Members of the Sultan's harem, where communication was often highly controlled, or ambitious courtiers plotting their rise or another's downfall. The mutes themselves were also invaluable for conveying secret messages between factions, as they heard nothing and could not be coerced into revealing spoken secrets. Imagine two high-ranking viziers, ostensibly discussing the weather or some trivial court gossip in low tones, but their hands subtly moving, exchanging vital, potentially treasonous information about a rival's plans or a proposed coup. The stakes were incredibly high. Alliances, betrayals, plots for power, life or death decisions, all conveyed through silent, precise gestures. A quirky tidbit about these secret palace whispers involves specific, perhaps very subtle or unusual, signs for highly secretive or conspiratorial concepts. Given the dangers of the court, the language might have developed very specific, quick, and almost hidden signs for conspiracy, betrayal, plot, or specific targets of intrigue, allowing for rapid and discreet communication even in the most dangerous moments. Imagine a sign for danger that was a mere twitch of a finger, or a quick, almost imperceptible hand motion under a sleeve. There's joke number one. He just signed, the Sultan wants more tea. Or was that, the Sultan knows your secret plans and is very displeased? Hard to tell with the subtlety. The beyond formal communication with the Sultan, the Ottoman palace sign language was also widely utilized by courtiers and powerful figures for highly discreet or clandestine conversations, enabling private exchanges of sensitive information, political plots, and intricate intrigues within the secretive, often volatile, environment of the imperial court due to its inherent visual privacy and security against auditory eavesdropping. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting its role in secret communication. Historians debate the practical effectiveness of the Ottoman palace sign language for complex clandestine activities. While it certainly prevented auditory eavesdropping, was it truly secure against skilled observers who might deduce meaning from context or repeated interactions? Were there known instances of sign language plots being uncovered? Or did the system generally maintain its secrecy for such highly sensitive matters, demonstrating its genuine security capabilities against skilled opponents? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, probing just how impenetrable this silent fortress of communication truly was in practice. The use of sign language for secret palace whispers transformed communication in the Ottoman court, making it possible to plot, conspire, and manage sensitive information in plain sight, yet beyond the grasp of unseen ears. Joke number two. You try to deliver a secret message to a friend across a crowded room. You mime it. They just look confused. Right, less covert communication, more bad charades. It underscored the unique blend of power, discretion, and peril that defined the Ottoman court. Joke number three. You imagine someone trying to keep a secret in a regular court? Oh, I just heard the Grand Vizier whisper. Regicide? Did anyone else hear that? No. You've learned about how officials and courtiers used palace sign language for secret whispers and clandestine matters, leveraging its visual privacy. But the elegance and discretion of the palace sign language weren't just for guarding secrets, they were also intricately woven into the very fabric of the Ottoman court's rigid social structure. The silent communication explicitly reflected and reinforced the strict hierarchy of the court. A world where social status influenced interactions down to the smallest gesture. The Ottoman court was a place of absolute hierarchy. Every individual, from the Sultan himself down to the lowest servant, had a defined place and set of protocols. This rigid system permeated every aspect of palace life, including how people communicated. The privilege of direct silent communication with the Sultan, or even with high-ranking officials through signs, was not granted lightly. Think about who learned the language. While the mutes were immersed in it from a young age, serving as dedicated silent communicators, only the Sultan and a select few of his most powerful and trusted officials, like the Grand Vizier, viziers, and high-ranking palace functionaries, were expected to master the full palace sign language. Lower-ranking courtiers, even if they had some exposure to it, might only know a limited set of basic signs relevant to their immediate duties, or rely on an interpreter. This created layers of access to silent communication, reflecting the layers of power. This hierarchy dictated who could sign to whom and in what manner. A high-ranking official, fluent in the palace sign language, had the privilege of communicating directly with the Sultan in signs during an audience or private meeting, conveying complex reports or receiving commands. This direct silent line was a mark of immense trust and influence. A lower-ranking servant, even if they knew a few basic signs, would never directly sign to the Sultan. They would communicate through an intermediary, often a mute attendant, who would then convey the message. The mute, while highly trusted, was still a servant, and their signs carried the authority of the person they represented, not necessarily their own personal rank. The manner of signing itself could reflect status. High-ranking individuals, accustomed to commanding authority, might use more subtle, refined, or concise gestures. Their signs might be more economical, conveying complex ideas with minimal movement. Lower-ranking individuals, when communicating with a superior, would likely adopt more deferential postures and gestures, perhaps signing with their hands held lower or with a more respectful demeanor, even within the silent language. Sensory details the visual of precise, dignified hand movements from a high official, the contrast with a mute's deferential posture, the palpable silence reinforcing the weight of each gesture, the feeling of understanding someone's rank just by how they sign. The very act of signing, and the interpretation of its nuances, was a performance of social intelligence. Knowing how to form a sign was one thing, knowing when to use it, to whom, and with what subtle accompanying body language was another entirely. Demonstrating your understanding of courtly protocol and social standing. The use of palace sign language in the Ottoman court explicitly reflected and reinforced the empire's strict social hierarchy. Proficiency in the full language and the privilege of direct silent communication were primarily reserved for the Sultan and highest-ranking officials, with specific interaction protocols and manners of signing varying strictly by rank and status. This is our mainstream historical fact, detailing how the communication system mirrored the social structure. A quirky tidbit about this hierarchical signing involves specific, perhaps very subtle, signs that indicated deference or a specific rank. Some accounts hint at specific gestures used to acknowledge the Sultan's absolute authority, or to convey a deep bow or salute in silent form, beyond merely lowering one's head. There might also have been specific, perhaps almost imperceptible nuances in how a high-ranking official signed to someone of lower status. A subtle difference in the speed or emphasis of a gesture that communicated authority. Imagine a grand vizier using a particularly crisp or economical sign for dismissed that would immediately indicate the finality of the command, simply by its form. There's joke number 1. He just signed, "Your Majesty is wise." And I think the extra flourish on wise means he wants a promotion. Historians debate the precise rules and practical application of hierarchy within the Ottoman palace sign language. Were there specific codified signs or protocols to indicate the rank of the speaker or recipient, a specific suffix gesture for a vizier, or a different hand position for a mute addressing the Sultan? Did the system allow for any exceptions or informalities between individuals of similar rank but different social standing? Was it purely a top-down communication system from the Sultan, or did it also facilitate upward communication from lower ranks in a formalized way? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, delving into the minute details of how rank permeated silent exchanges. The integration of hierarchy into silent communication made the Ottoman court a unique social environment. Every interaction, even the unspoken ones, was a subtle reaffirmation of power and status. Joke number 2. You try to casually sign to a lower-ranking official. You accidentally use the imperial command gesture. He bows deeply. Whoops. My bad. Just wanted to ask for the salt. It added another layer of complexity to navigating social life at the heart of the empire. Joke number 3. You imagine a new courtier. Right, so a flick of the wrist means agree for the Sultan, But for the Grand Vizier, it means you're dismissed. Got it. You've learned about how the palace sign language reflected and reinforced the court's strict hierarchy, with gestures and protocols indicating rank and status. This intricate system of silent communication was a defining characteristic of the Ottoman court from the inside. But what about from the outside? How did foreign ambassadors, envoys, and travelers, accustomed to different courtly manners, perceive this profound quiet and reliance on silent gestures around the Sultan? Their accounts often reveal astonishment, bewilderment, and a deep fascination with this unique feature of the Ottoman Empire. Imagine yourself as a European ambassador, perhaps from the Holy Roman Empire or France, granted an audience with the mighty Ottoman Sultan in Topkapi Palace. You're accustomed to the ceremonial grandeur of your own courts, which might be filled with the rustle of silks, the murmur of courtiers, the clatter of arms, and the loud pronouncements of officials and heralds. You expect formality, but perhaps not. Silence, as you are led into the audience hall or a private chamber. The first thing that strikes you is the profound quiet. The air feels still, almost hushed. Courtiers stand in perfect silence, their expressions composed, their movements minimal. There's no chatter, no whispered gossip, no general hum of human activity that you'd expect in such a grand space. This quietness is a deliberate, unnerving contrast to the world you come from. Sensory details, the visual of an opulent hall filled with silent, still figures, the almost eerie absence of sound, the muffled sound of your own careful footsteps as you approach, the palpable tension in the air. Then, you are presented before the Sultan. He sits, perhaps on a throne or divan, majestic and unmoving. You perform the required bows and gestures of respect, your movements careful, perhaps a little awkward in the oppressive silence. And when it comes time for communication, the Sultan does not speak aloud. He makes a series of precise, fluid gestures with his hands. A mute attendant or a high-ranking official fluent in the palace sign language then translates these silent commands into spoken words, often in a soft, respectful tone. For your benefit, when you speak your reply, it is translated back into signs for the Sultan. This experience left a lasting impression on many foreign observers. They were fascinated by the unique nature of this court, which seemed so alien compared to the loud, often boisterous European royal courts. They often highlighted the mutes and the sign language as one of the most peculiar and striking features of the Ottoman palace. They saw it as both a testament to the Sultan's absolute power commanding silence and a tool for profound secrecy in a realm full of intrigue. Ogier Ghiselin de Busbecq, a Flemish diplomat who served as the Holy Roman Empire's ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in the mid-16th century, left detailed accounts of his experiences. He described the profound silence around the Sultan, the solemn demeanor of the attendants, and the reliance on gesture communication, noting that the Turks hold silence in reverence. His detailed descriptions were highly influential in shaping European perceptions of the Ottoman court. European ambassadors and travelers frequently noted their astonishment and sometimes bewilderment with the profound quietness and extensive use of silent communication, particularly the palace sign language around the Ottoman Sultan. They described this as a unique and striking feature of the imperial court, often interpreting it as a symbol of the Sultan's absolute power and the court's secrecy. This is our mainstream historical fact, highlighting the external perception. The diplomatic implications were significant. Foreign envoys had to adapt to this unique communication environment. They relied heavily on interpreters, not just for spoken languages, but often for bridging the gap between their verbal communication and the silent language of the court. Misunderstandings could be very costly, highlighting the pressure on the interpreters to be perfectly accurate and discreet. Modern aside, imagine conducting a high-stakes international negotiation where one side only communicates through a complex, silent sign language, and you have to rely on a human interpreter. It's like a very analog, high-stakes encrypted chat. A quirky tidbit about foreign reactions involves anecdotal accounts of bewilderment, or even humorous misunderstandings. Some foreign visitors, unfamiliar with the nuances of gesture, might have misinterpreted a polite gesture as a negative one, or struggled to keep from speaking too loudly in moments of surprise or frustration. There are probably apocryphal stories of foreign envoys inadvertently offending the Sultan by making a loud noise or a gesture that meant something entirely different in the court sign language. There's joke number one: he bowed, I bowed. The Sultan moved his thumb. I just assumed it meant more baklava. Please, it did not. Historians debate the accuracy and potential biases of European diplomatic and travel accounts, describing the Ottoman court's silent communication. Were these observations truly objective portrayals of the system's everyday use and full complexity? Or were they sometimes exaggerated, sensationalized, or colored by European prejudices and assumptions about Oriental despotism, leading to a portrayal that emphasized the exotic and the intimidating aspects of the silent court more than its practical functions? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, questioning the reliability of our sources. The experience of foreign visitors highlights just how peculiar and striking the Ottoman court's communication system was. It was a deliberate choice, shaping how the world perceived the Sultan and his immense power. Joke number two: you write in your diary that night. Day 3 at the Sultan's court. Still no one talking. My jaw aches from not speaking. It underscored the unique culture and traditions that flourished within Topkapi Palace, a world where silence spoke volumes and gestures were words of imperial command. Joke number 3. You imagine a European diplomat trying to explain it back home. Yes, Your Majesty, the Sultan commands with his hands, and you really don't want to know what his displeased gesture looks like. You've explored how foreign ambassadors, accustomed to the noisy courts of Europe, were astonished and sometimes bewildered by the profound, quiet, and extensive use of silent communication around the Ottoman Sultan. This unique system was striking, effective, and deeply ingrained in court life. But the practice of extensive silent communication, particularly the palace sign language, did not persist indefinitely. It gradually faded from prominence over the later centuries of the Ottoman Empire, giving way to more conventional verbal interactions. The decline was not a sudden abolition of the system, but a slow, almost imperceptible shift that occurred over decades, influenced by various factors. The rigid protocols and unique practices of the Ottoman court, which reached their peak in the 16th and 17th centuries, began to change. One significant factor was the changing style of the sultans themselves. Later sultans, particularly from the 18th century onwards, often had different personal preferences regarding court interaction. Some preferred a more direct verbal style of communication, moving away from the earlier seclusion and the almost sacred mystique that had surrounded their predecessors. As individual sultans became more engaged in daily administrative affairs, or were more inclined to speak openly with their viziers and officials, the practical need for a pervasive silent communication system lessened. This shift in sultanic preference coincided with broader trends of westernization and modernization within the Ottoman Empire. As the empire engaged more frequently and deeply with European powers, there was a growing desire to adopt Western administrative practices, military organization, and even court etiquette. European courts, as we noted, were largely verbal. The extensive reliance on silent communication, while unique and effective, might have gradually come to be seen by some as archaic or peculiar in an increasingly globalized and modernizing world. Modern aside, it's a bit like how companies today might transition from a highly formal, hierarchical communication style to a more open, casual one. Seeing the old ways as outdated, the role of the mute-deaf individuals in the imperial court also gradually diminished. While they continued to serve for some time, their specific and highly integrated role as silent communicators lessened as the overall court structure changed and as the perceived necessity for such extreme secrecy and awe-inspiring silence around the Sultan became less pronounced. The pipeline for their recruitment and training might also have changed. While palace secrecy always remained important, The methods of ensuring it might have shifted. The political landscape within the palace itself might have changed, making constant silent communication less critical for certain types of information. Or perhaps the very practicality of swift verbal exchange for increasingly complex administrative details, especially in a modernizing state, began to outweigh the benefits of silent communication. As fewer sultans strictly adhered to the silent protocol, and as a new generation of officials might have been less rigorously trained in the palace sign language, the language itself might have begun to lose some of its complexity and fluency. It became less a living, evolving system and more a specialized, declining practice. Imagine the sensory experience of this fading. The profound quiet around the sultan, which had once been almost absolute, might gradually become less so. You might hear more whispered conversations, then soft-spoken words, then perhaps even occasional normal tones, slowly filling the void that was once silence. The visual dance of hands, once ubiquitous, would become less frequent, reserved for truly specific or symbolic moments. Sensory details the subtle increase in audible sounds filtering into previously silent areas, the visual of fewer and less intense signing interactions, the feeling of a shift in the court's overall atmosphere. The extensive practice of palace sign language and the enforced atmosphere of profound silence in the Ottoman court gradually declined from the 18th century onwards, influenced primarily by changing sultanic preferences for more direct communication, broader modernization and westernization trends within the Ottoman Empire, and concurrent shifts in court administration and the specific roles of palace servants. This is our mainstream historical fact, outlining the reasons for the decline. A quirky tidbit about this decline involves specific anecdotes or observations from later periods. There are accounts, though, again, possibly exaggerated, of later sultans who, either through personal preference or perhaps a lack of full mastery, would sometimes struggle to maintain the silent protocol, occasionally breaking into speech or requiring more frequent interpretation. Imagine a sultan, exasperated, inadvertently blurting out an instruction instead of signing it. Much to the quiet surprise of his courtiers, there's joke number one. His Majesty just spoke aloud. I believe the centuries-old tradition of silence just let out a quiet sigh of relief. Historians debate the primary causes for the decline of the Ottoman palace sign language. Was the individual preference of successive sultans for more verbal interaction the single most significant factor in its fading from prominence? Or was it the broader tide of Ottoman modernization and westernization, which increasingly made such an esoteric and nonverbal system seem archaic or inefficient compared to European court practices? That was the overwhelming influence. This is our open scholarly debate phrase, trying to pinpoint the ultimate force behind the silent practices fading. The decline of the palace sign language marks the end of a unique chapter in Ottoman court history. It signified a shift away from a highly symbolic and secretive mode of governance towards more conventional interactions, a reflection of a changing empire. Joke number two. You imagine the mutes gradually retraining for new palace jobs. Right, so instead of signing, I now. Polish teacups. Progress. The quiet, elegant language that once spoke volumes began its slow descent into history. Joke number three. You look at the palace. It's getting louder. The secrets must be less secret now. You've traced the gradual fading of the palace sign language and the return of more verbal communication in the Ottoman court, influenced by changing sultans and the broader currents of modernization. This marked the end of a unique historical practice. But even though the strict, silent court is a thing of the past, its story leaves behind a fascinating legacy, prompting us to reflect on the meaning and implications of this peculiar communication system. The Ottoman court's reliance on silent gestures and enforced quietness was far more than a mere historical oddity. It was a sophisticated, multifunctional system that reveals much about the nature of power, hierarchy, and communication in the Ottoman Empire. It highlights the ingenuity of adapting to specific environmental the need for secrecy and social. The Sultan's elevated status demands its primary functions, ensuring secrecy and security around the Sultan and sensitive state affairs, demonstrate the intense political intrigue and danger inherent in the court. The ability to conduct crucial conversations in plain sight, yet beyond the reach of eavesdroppers, was a powerful tool for self-preservation and control. The system also deliberately cultivated an aura of awe and mystique around the Sultan. The enforced silence, the solemnity, and the reliance on symbolic gestures transformed the ruler into an almost unapproachable, semi-divine figure whose every subtle movement carried immense weight. This amplified his authority and reinforced the vast distance between him and even his closest advisors. Furthermore, the palace sign language itself represents a remarkable example of linguistic adaptation and human ingenuity. It was a complex, nuanced system capable of conveying intricate ideas without a single sound, developed and refined over generations. It also created unique roles for deaf individuals, mutes within the court, transforming a perceived disability into a highly valued asset, granting them unparalleled access and trust in the Sultan's intimate circle. This unique communication system contrasts sharply with modern expectations of transparency and directness in leadership. And even with the typical noisy and verbally dynamic courts of contemporary Europe, it forces us to consider how differently societies have conceptualized power, hierarchy, and privacy throughout history. The unique and pervasive system of silent communication, particularly the palace sign language and the integral role of deaf servants mutes, developed in the Ottoman imperial court from the 16th to 18th centuries, stands as a remarkable historical testament to human ingenuity in adapting communication for purposes of extreme secrecy, reinforcing social hierarchy, and cultivating an awe-inspiring aura around the Sultan. This is our mainstream historical fact, summarizing its unique significance. A quirky tidbit about its legacy involves its continued fascination for modern scholars and even sign language enthusiasts. While the full language is largely lost, as is the context of its specific courtly nuances, fragments of descriptions and interpretations continue to spark interest, inspiring historical linguists and deaf studies researchers to try and piece together what this ancient silent tongue might have looked and functioned like. Imagine a modern expert trying to reconstruct the sign for imperial decree from a 17th century travelogue. There's joke number 1, archaeology of silence. It's like finding a ghost whisperer's diary. Historians debate the precise long-term impact and symbolic significance of the Ottoman palace sign language on broader nonverbal communication within Ottoman society, or even beyond the empire's borders. Was this system primarily an isolated court phenomenon? Or did its existence influence wider perceptions of nonverbal communication, or silent decorum in Ottoman public life, or diplomatic interactions? Did it leave any lasting legacy on the development of general sign languages in the region, though this is less likely for such a specialized court language? This is our open scholarly debate phrase, probing the deeper, wider ripples of this unique historical practice. The Ottoman court's silent communication system reminds us that history is full of surprising adaptations and ingenious solutions to seemingly mundane or incredibly high-stakes problems. It shows how even the most intimate human acts, like communication, can be shaped by power, culture, and context. Joke number 2. You reflect on the silence. So much unsaid, and yet so much understood. What a system. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound messages are conveyed without uttering a single word. Joke number 3. You imagine trying to get a quick answer from a modern politician with this system. I just need a yes or no gesture. Please, no long speeches. And now, as our journey through the strange history of Ottoman sultans communicating through silent gestures comes to a close, you can let the images of opulent, quiet palace corridors fade. The visual dance of hands is softening. The sounds of enforced stillness are receding. You can let go of the secrets, the hierarchy, the aura of awe. All the history, the details, the peculiar communication are settling down for the night. They are safe now, remembered, Appreciate it as a fascinating glimpse into a unique past. Peace. Quiet. The palace is still. The gestures are at rest. Breathing easy. Letting go. Drifting. End of script. Sweet dreams.